This is The View from Where We Live. The View from Where We Live, where we'll take a look at the stories of our time.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for another broadcast of The View from Where We Live. I'm your host, Mary Eckert, and today my guest is Marianne Helm. And we are going to take a look at the gift she gave Sheboygan, perspective. Her perspective on perspective. And hopefully this will shed some light on understanding how we think and how it affects how we live. Marianne is the director of the Holistic Health Center on Sheboygan's far south side, and she wrote the book, Welcome to My World, Two Perspectives on One Life Lived. Marianne, please tell us just a quick bit about the center that came first in your life as a career, and then you became an author. So if you can tell us what the Holistic Health Center is, what holistic means. And
well, now you're onto one of my very favorite subjects, of course, but I will be brief.
That's what I was aiming for.
But I will be brief. Okay. Holistic simply means the whole person, or as everything relates to the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. Years and years ago, we were thinking in terms of our healthcare system, in terms of treating an elbow or treating a knee or treating a mental health disorder. But the concept of holistic kind of was birthed out of a wellness orientation or a wellness point of view. And the understanding...
Better to work for wellness than cure illness.
There you go, that continuum, the illness-wellness continuum that eventually got us to the place of saying we need to take a look at treating the whole person. And in addition to the whole person, sometimes the whole family unit. Mm-hmm. And so even corporations would be taking a look at dysfunction in their systems, and we would have to look at a whole corporation. So holistic simply means the whole picture and all of the different facets and features that contribute to that.
And what year was the Holistic Center? You
know, we started that in 1986. Prior to that, I had been the executive director of the Sheboygan Wellness Association for 4 years. First Congregational Church, but that gives me a career now of about 35 years in this business, and I am absolutely doing my life. I love what I do every single day, and the doors all opened and aligned and in just the right path for me. So
good. We're here to learn some lessons from your book, and before we get into the book, we need a dictionary definition of perspective, so that everybody knows what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And that would be...
Again, that's why I'm so glad to be here today, and I congratulate you on this show, because the word perspective really just means your point of view, or it means you know, how you came to a specific place of thinking. Mm-hmm. So here we are in a show called The View from Where We Live, talking about perspective, and of course it's a perfect match for me, for you today. Mm-hmm. But perspective just simply means you know, the way that we see things, but it is based on various factors. It isn't just an opinion. That opinion got formed or is being formed on an ongoing basis by so many different factors about who we are as individuals. It has to do with my age, it has to do with my gender, it has to do with my culture, it has to do with my religious beliefs, it has to do with everything that I have ever experienced in life, ever read, conversations I've had. All of these things help form my perspective, and so the older we get, of course, the richer that perspective can be. My perspective, for instance, about certain things is very different from my grandsons who are under the age of 10.
That brings up a wonderful point. I was with an old college friend for a weekend, and we were in a restaurant, and I said, "Oh, Christy, when we were friends a long time ago, we were unscarred, unshaped, unformed, and now we're sitting here talking about all the events that happened in between." So
I'd like to give you just an example. If you just take an image of a beautiful picture, well, a picture, I won't label it good or bad or beautiful, but a picture, and it's a winter scene, and it's just all white snow, and right in the middle of that winter scene of snow is a stark black tree. The leaves are gone, it's barren, so it's a black and white picture. And an individual who may be slightly prone to depression or is maybe coming from a negative point of view might look at that picture and say, oh my goodness, how depressing. That makes me feel so lonely and it makes me feel so sad. But listen to this perspective. Listen to this point of view. I wonder if the snow loves the trees and feels that it kisses them so gently. And then it covers them up snug, you know, with a white fluffy quilt, and perhaps it says, go to sleep, darlings, till the summer comes again. That was Lewis Carroll.
Okay.
And so as you're taking a look at perspective, even in art, and I know that you just finished a program with Brad Fleming and with Dale Knock, and as you're looking at the issue of art and perspective, it's what the viewer brings to that. And it's the same thing with life events. It's what the viewer or the experiencer brings to life.
The depressed person would have seen the black tree,
depressing, cold, barren, and Lewis Carroll sees it wrapped up in a fluffy white quilt with nature's love. So
there's another story about a school child who is not wanting to paint his picture on a piece of white paper, and the teacher comes along and says, talks to other kids about what's on their pieces of paper and says, oh, what a beautiful blizzard, and the kid is just stunned. But it's the same thing, you know?
Exactly. Right.
So anyhow, your book is titled Welcome to My World, Two Perspectives on One Life Lived. I think that's it, the title just is perfect. How you structured the book is so obviously an apparent tool to get your point across. Tell us where it came from.
Obvious. I'm glad you think it's obvious. That's good.
Well,
that's a good thing, I think.
Well,
but I did write that story.
But tell how the inside of the book is structured to show, literally. Go.
The title, right? It unfolded primarily because some clients were coming to the Holistic Health Center and just traumatized by a life event, not able to move from it, not able to talk about it in different terms. The recitation of the story was exactly identical. The emotional tone was the same. They were almost re-victimizing themselves every time they told their story because it was just so absolutely practiced and rehearsed and thought about in the exact same way. And yet another client would come in with a similar experience and be able to reframe it and be able to talk about it in different ways as they went through counseling. And as a result, was able to see it in a different way and ultimately heal and move on. And so I was looking at these different clients, and I'm thinking how frequently in life that is the case, that a life event happens, and yet everyone participating in that life event or everyone viewing it seems to have a completely different perspective or interpretation of it.
Can I interrupt?
Sure, sure.
How you get locked in repeating it, how do you get out of it?
Well, and that's what I'm suggesting is a reframing. And so to be able to look at it in a different way. So a good counselor might say to that person, can you see that in a different way? And some people say, no, I can't. That's how I see it. And that becomes then their truth, and that becomes their reality, and they claim that status and just can't seem to heal from it. So I wrote a book, and I thought, I'm going to just see if I can do this in a very pronounced, very deliberate fashion, to use it as a teaching tool. Say, here are some examples. Here are some examples of stories. And it's really nothing but a collection of short little stories. We take one woman in her life. I've named her Midge, just picked a name. And the event of the
This
event
is being
that
adapted
has happened,
for stage.
Oh.
So just so people know that
we're kind of
working on with
working
Ralph's
on
Muffin Jelly from
turning this
Sheboygan.
into a play, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So
Which I think could be very interesting
Yeah.
on stage.
Yeah.
But anyway, I chose a series of stories that takes us through the life of one woman. And her name is Midge. And we kind of take a look at the event that has happened, and then the very negative Midge writes about it, all from that negative perspective. And a very positive Midge takes a look at it and writes a story that's all from a very positive perspective. We turn the page, we see another life event, we get the negative point of view, we get the positive. We keep going through the book until we get to the very end of the story, where we see that as a result of a negative point of view that has been practiced and practiced and practiced versus a very positive point of view that has been practiced and practiced, results in a very different funeral, obituary, and memory of this woman. So she literally leaves a different legacy because she is literally a different person.
amongst in the view of all these people.
Exactly.
Just give one actual not a picture illustration, but illustrate how one story with the
well, why don't you hand me my little book
your
back
little
there?
book.
Because
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
Because I think
Just
that
quickly,
I think
while
the
you're
chapter
looking,
titles.
while you're looking, the idea that springs to my mind, and it's not from the book, is it's a mother saying to her child, "Oh my gosh, you got so dirty. You were playing in the dirt. Now I have to clean you up. I have to change your clothes." The other mother says, "Oh, you must have had a ball out there. You are filthy. Get in the tub."
Right,
You
exactly.
know?
And that's a simple, very good example. But I think that just the table of contents, the chapter titles, pretty much says it all.
Okay.
So instead of giving lots of examples,
Share
I'm
a
just going to
couple.
say that the chapter is called Nuptials on the Farm. One woman sees it as a celebration of love at high noon. One woman sees it as, oh no, my daughter's a pig farmer. The China Cabinet is the next chapter. One woman sees it as Granny's treasures. The other woman writes her story as nothing but junk. One woman writes, the chapter is called My Yard, My Backyard. One woman says a sanctuary of life and nature. The other one sees nothing but poop. And on it goes. So we just see that that as a result of the way that the choice of perspective, and I can't stress this enough really, that perspective is a choice.
Okay.
That it can absolutely change the outcome of who you are and how you're remembered and the legacy you leave behind it. Very, very powerful.
Would it be fair to say that everything is perspective or perception?
Well, I think so. Everybody would not agree with me on that. There are people who have more absolutes, more black and whites. I really tend to see life in lots of shades of gray. And
Do you see red flags or warnings when you see yourself going for an absolute? Do you nip it or?
no, I think we all have to have a moral compass.
Yeah.
I think there are some
Balance.
things that are, but I know when I say a moral compass, I mean I think that I know when something is wrong for me.
Okay.
I know that.
It's an individual thing?
I know when something is not right for me, and I know that that's not something that's arbitrary. I think that generally I don't know that everything can be labeled good or bad.
Okay.
So I think it's just important to keep that in mind, that there are lots and lots of different ways of looking at things, and
Being told you have perspective might be considered a compliment. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? To have a lot of perspective is valuable.
well, everyone has perspective. Everybody has a lot of perspective. So I don't really think that is a compliment or a negative. I think maybe the question is leading to something else, which is, as a result of having different ways of thinking, have you gleaned any insights? And insights are different than perspectives. Perspectives is your way of looking at something, and insight might be more described as a lesson that you learned as a result of having a perspective. So I think the question, I would rather hear the question, I would rather get a compliment that says to me, you have wonderful insights.
You have, rather than you have perspective.
Right, I would rather hear that than you have perspective, because everybody's got perspectives. I mean, it's just...
And you can have perspective like the plague. You can understand this perspective and this perspective, and you're so aware of both sides. It's impossible to find what to do about it, you know?
Well, and that I think brings us to the next point of discussion, which is are there advantages and disadvantages to you know to the way that perspective is developed? And frankly, having different perspectives really makes life complicated. It's much easier to have an absolute opinion of right and wrong and black and white and to go through life in that black and white place. It's simple. You don't have to think. You don't have to really weigh that. You don't have to really process it. You don't have to factor in variables. It's just black or white. But being open to seeing things through the openness of a chosen perspective makes life complicated. And Mary, it also, and this is really important, it also contributes to a life of great responsibility. Because you now are in a position where I think you need to understand that because it is a choice, you have to be constantly thinking. I'm so sad when I just heard about a university that had a critical thinking class that was canceled because they couldn't find enough people to sign up for the critical thinking class. And I was raised in a family where critical thinking was required. My father simply didn't have anything much to say to you if you hadn't thought it all the way through.
Can you give an example?
Anything, you name it. I mean, if you haven't thought
what's
it all the way
something a
through.
parent could tell their child tonight? Have you thought about
There were
this?
less, yeah, it's hard to just conjure that up right now, but I mean, anything that had to do with our teenagers, especially driving, drinking, boyfriends, I mean, all of that. It was just like, and then years later, it would be like, which career or your job, or have you thought that all the way through? And he really respected thinking. And so as a result, if we wanted a relationship with our dad, we had to be able to meet him on that level. So my mom brought the heart to the family, and my dad had the head. It would have been, so that's kind of where that's it.
You were going to bring up an example of some World War I soldiers.
Yes, absolutely.
I've been
thank
waiting.
You. Thank you. Yeah, the complexity of of having perspectives and this is a book that I just finished reading, and it was funny because when you called and asked if I would do the show, I was just reading this book. It's called Unbroken, and it's by an author named Laura Hildebrand. And she is writing a story about World War I soldiers who were captured and are in camps. And this was a process that was going on with 2 soldiers.
Do you know where the camp was?
I'm not exactly, I don't recall exactly. Though both men faced the same hardship, their differing perceptions of it appeared to be shaping their fate. One had hope, and that displaced fear and inspired him to work toward his survival. And each small success renewed his physical and emotional vigor. The other man was resigned and hopeless and seemed to be paralyzed with fear. Because of this, he participated less in their efforts to survive. He did the least. He spent the least energy, and yet he faded the fastest. The first one was optimistic, the other one was hopeless, and yet both were experiencing self-fulfilling destinies.
I used to teach confidence, and that was the big push of the whole thing was create your own positive life. Don't react to what others are throwing at you. If you spend your time dealing with their stuff, you're dealing with icky stuff. You cannot make the positive, good life for yourself.
Well, and that you bring up an interesting point. The word react is an interesting word, and I think as we get older, we find ourselves when this happens and this is the reaction. But if we take time and have neutral opinions about it, we can step back and respond. And we don't have to just, reaction means you haven't, it's an automatic, a reaction is an automatic thing. A response is a thoughtful thing.
And that's created by you.
And that's where the responsibility factor comes in when you're talking about living a life that is thoughtful, and the word perspective is a choice, that it becomes your responsibility to step back a moment and look at that picture and let a response be evoked from you. And that's why I like the show that you just did with the artists, because
Speaking of the artist, you requested that painting because it's abstract, impressionistic, not representational like this one is. This one's defined, and that, what does that say? You'd have that hanging in your house?
I do abstract art, actually.
Okay.
I'm an abstract artist with
for those reasons.
Well, yeah, because I think that just like life
Fluid,
events,
changing.
And you bring yourself to the life event. It's not just happening to you. You bring yourself to that piece of art. You bring yourself to that piece of art. You bring yourself to the winter tree scene. And what your response is going to be is really not based on what the artist did. Your response is going to be based on what's inside of you. And so this is why it becomes a path of responsibility to live your life choosing perspective, because really it's all about, where you're coming from. And oftentimes when people, choose different perspectives, they look at each other, they're so perplexed, and they're like, how can you see it that way?
Now that we know what perspective is that why it's important for us to qualify or like put a disclaimer on viewpoints that would say, in my opinion, or I think, it would keep you out of trouble instead of making flat assertions, like just take religion or politics, for example. They're pretty obvious. If you say, why don't you believe in God? There is a God. You have to believe in Him. That makes an argument. If you say, in my opinion, I think there is a God, at least you're leaving room for discussion rather than argument. So.
Well, sure. I mean, all I have is my own perspective. I don't, and I just said before that because if you live in a world of black and white and absolutes, you're not going to speak that way. But if you live in a world of open possibilities, then you're going to speak in terms of it's my opinion or I think.
And I'm just saying you should put that disclaimer on.
But people don't.
Yeah, but people, and I'm saying if they would, there'd be less arguments and more understanding.
There would be fewer.
This person says this because this person says because this is his experience, not an absolute.
Yeah.
Another thing that's sort of a qualifier is, are people locked in by childhood concepts of words that lock in their attitudes now? Give them the perspective they have now because what they were taught as a child. I think we talked about the words good and bad. You were going to say a little bit about that and mention a slide that you...
Sure. Well, sure. I mean, concepts are formed. I like the way that you phrased that question. Are they locked in at childhood? You see, that's what we're talking about. Sometimes they are. And that people who have concepts of right and wrong and black and white that get locked in at childhood, just imagine as you start to have life experiences and you keep bumping up against things and you're stuck with this that doesn't really make sense anymore. These folks just can't make sense of their world. They just can't make sense of it because they don't know how to interpret it. Yep. They have no ability to choose a perception because it's either this way or that way and there's no in between. And so it's what's important about that in childhood is to, you know, raise healthy kids with possibilities and
open-minded
wonderment
with your
and
children.
be in wonder, be in awe, ask questions. You know, I mean, we need to teach children certain things, but wouldn't you rather have us teach children how to think it through? How to wonder about it out loud, how to be in awe of it and not know everything. And so the danger comes when we prematurely form this knowing that might be wrong. And we do go through life kind of with our evidence bucket. I know you and I
that's
talked
cool.
about that.
Yeah.
We talked about that a couple times. We've been together for lunch or whatever. And you know, people form their truths. And the goal, the role of...
How can people use the evidence bucket? I like that.
Well, let me get to that.
Image.
I think the way that the responsibility that as we grow to, you know, take that locked-in concept that we may have been given or whatever, our job is to, as adults, to continue to grow and thrive and transform our lives. I've asked him to put up a slide, and he's going to put that up in just a moment, and it's about the process of transformation. And I think that it's really important to start with the understanding that we first have to be aware of our thoughts, be aware of what that thought is, to catch it, to be able to catch it when it's happening. My goodness, this is what I'm thinking, this is what my thought is. So to pause for a moment and catch your thoughts, because a thought becomes an emotion, and an emotion becomes words, and words become beliefs, which now becomes your truth. And those beliefs become your actions. We always act on what we think is our belief. And our actions become our legacy. That's what we're remembered for. And so if you want to change your life, if you want to change your legacy, if you really want to rewrite your own personal history, you have to change your thoughts. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
That's where it starts.
Change your thoughts and
change your thoughts.
And handle them.
And so people who get this locked-in notion early on and never do this transformation process, they go around through life with their evidence bucket.
Okay,
And
say more about that.
It's a kind of an
Who came up with that?
I don't know.
Is it in a book or did it come out of the Holistic Health Center?
I've been studying for 35 years, remember, so who knows? I can't even recall. But we go through life with an evidence bucket. Say, for instance, I have just flat out do not like Susie. I have decided I don't like Susie. I don't like her. Okay, I see her at a party. She's wearing a red dress. Oh, see, I don't. Into my evidence bucket goes, well, any woman who was wearing a red dress to a party. Oh, she's moving from person to person, flitting around. Oh, she's such a flirt. Goes into my evidence bucket, right? I don't like Susie, so everything I see her do goes into my evidence bucket to prove to me that I'm right.
Yeah.
And so someone else says, "Are you kidding? She's the life of the party. She's wonderful. She's so much fun. She's great," and that's their perspective of her.
Okay, Marianne.
Yeah.
You have taken enough time that you got yourself out of answering the top 10 lightning round questions to give us a view from where you live upstairs here.
Good.
I just want to give you one shot, though, at
Yeah, it's when you start getting me talking, Mary, you ought to know a half an hour is going to
go fast. Okay, we'll just cut to the chase here and say thank you for spending time today with my guest, Marianne Helm. She's the director of the Holistic Health Center in Sheboygan and the author of Welcome to My World, 2 Perspectives on One Life Lived. I'm your host, Mary Eckert, and I hope we have enhanced the view from where you live.